All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. Graham Coffee, Dawgs Central, man. How you doing, bud?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Back in the car again. So sorry about that, but excited to talk some Georgia, Texas with you.
Yeah. So I'll ask a question about that, then we'll talk Mississippi State, then we'll move on. But is there more pressure on Georgia because of the conference loss they already have, or more pressure on Texas big picture to prove that they belong here?
I think that there's a lot of pressure on both. I know that's kind of a cop out answer, but what is interesting to me about this matchup is Georgia really is, the lower ranked team. They are the Vegas underdog for the first time in a long time for them, right? I mean, we haven't seen them not favored in a game in a few years, really. So, like, in that sense, I think Texas kind of has the pressure. Like, I often say, getting to number one in college football is a lot different than playing as number one and kind of protecting that spot. And Texas doesn't have a ton of experience with that. Doesn't mean that they won't do a good job of it, but we just haven't really seen them do that much. So that there's that side of it with Georgia. Obviously, though, like, you need to win this game to kind of create a level of certainty around making the playoff. You lose this game and you got to white knuckle the rest of the season, basically, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't afford another loss, and you got to go to Oxford, you got to host Tennessee. Like, things get really tricky, and you put yourself into a very, very kind of precarious spot.
Yeah, razor thin margins if you can't get it done. Yeah, I'll follow up on that. Then we'll talk last week. The spread at 3.5. ESPN has Texas, which their FPI is not perfect by any means, but ESPN has Texas as like a 76% chance to win, which to
Yeah.
me seems pretty insanely high. I have a hard time thinking if this was played 10 times that Texas would win seven or more of them. But I do think that, the greatest, I don't want to call it con because there's such a negative connotation there, but the greatest con of all time is Kirby convincing like his best team ever that they were the underdogs all year.
Right.
But I also think he likes, to me, I think he kind of relishes the fact that they're the underdog. Like, I think he's like, yes, finally, let's go do it.
I think so. I mean, you could kind of feel that on Monday at their press availability. I mean, Kirby didn't really say anything in particular, but like there was just a different level of relaxation, or I don't know. He just seemed happy in a weird way, like Dan Jackson. We got Dan Jackson, the safety, and like I asked him straight up, what is this game like for you guys? You're not number one. You've been number one for a lot of the last couple of years while you've been here. Now you go play at number one on the road. And he said, we relish this opportunity, and we are excited for the opportunity. And also, we kind of look at it as like it's a big game because we're playing in it. So we'll sort of think about it that way too. But yeah, I think there's already like a little bit of we're disrespected, right? And the reality is just they lost a game and Texas hasn't. But whatever works for you, man. I mean, I think they haven't really played from a loose place all year. Like they really have kind of looked like anxious is the wrong word, but they've played a lot like they were kind of protecting something at times. Now I don't really think there's anything for them to protect. I think there's a clear situation in this game where it's like we want to go take something, and that's usually a better spot for a football team to be in generally with 18 to 22-year-old kids.
Yeah. So UGA fans that like live and breathe this thing are so dialed in may kind of know your thoughts here, or may kind of have their own thoughts on it. But just from the very macro of college football, why do you think UGA struggled last week? Is it a look ahead? Is it just kind of you get an off day? Like, what was it about Mississippi State that kind of made that game a little bit weird?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's elements of all of that. I mean, there are like Georgia. I don't want this to come off the wrong way because it's not like Georgia, saw Mississippi State as like a warm up game or anything like that. But like there are plays that happened in that game where guys are not in the spots they would usually be in. Like there's a touchdown run that Mississippi State has where Georgia has their best pass rushing defensive tackle like in a defensive end on a 1st and 10. We haven't really seen that all year. Like there's some of those kind of things that are just they didn't play certain guys nearly the amount of snaps that they normally play them, that they played them against Kentucky or Alabama or in some of these closer games. So there's that. I think there's also just Georgia got up, 34-10 in that game, and I think sort of just relaxed in Mississippi State. started making plays and playing some of their best football. So there's that side of it. And there's also the side of it of just like you bust two coverages in any game and you're putting points on the board.
Yeah.
And I mean, Kirby said afterwards, like, I was a little shocked that he said this as directly as he did, just because normally, you kind of hear coaches kind of coach speak things, but he's like, we gave them 14 points. And they did. I mean, they didn't cover a receiver on a very basic, play action RPO kind of look and gave up a 72-yard pass. And then they get down there and they back Mississippi State up back to like the 20, and they don't, they don't cover a motion man out of the backfield. So it's like those are mistakes that are going to put points on the board. They're also not really characteristic. Like we haven't seen Georgia make those mistakes all year. You look at Mississippi State's offense, it's not, triple option levels of weird, but it is more like going against like I don't want to use the word gimmick because it's not a gimmick, but like it's kind of like a hypo offense or, one of those where it's like there's all this motion and RPO and play action going on all the time, and they're kind of in that hyper spread and they run all this tempo. And I think the combination of those things, Georgia got a little lazy with eye discipline, and Mississippi State made them pay for it. Also, there were plays, dude, where Georgia, like, Julian Humphrey's in great position on the last touchdown pass that Mississippi State has, and the Mississippi State kid throws a dime. Like, it's a great ball. And at the end of the day, good offense is always going to beat good defense. And there were elements of that happened. So, like, tip your cap to Mississippi State because I think that quarterback they have is going to be a player. I know he's a true freshman and all of that, and that the optics of it don't look good. But I'm telling you, I cover college football for a living. That kid made some throws in that game that I don't see very many people make.
Yeah. The thing that has probably impressed me the most about Texas, and maybe the biggest question for them coming to the SEC. Now, I don't know that they've played a great SEC team yet, but the way that they dominate in the trenches, and the way that Steve, obviously he's been in SEC programs and gets this, but the way that he's built the trenches there, the way that they just ran through Michigan. I know Michigan has no offense, and I know Oklahoma has no offense, but still, like the way that their trenches kind of dominate. Now, I certainly don't expect them to dominate UGA's trenches, but to me, and it's so cliche. Like I won't even say the cliche, but games are won here, right? But like, what are your thoughts on the matchups, really on both sides of the ball, with what Texas has and how UGA is playing along the front of each side?
No, I mean, I think that there is, how should I put it? Like Texas, the difference between Texas and Oklahoma right now, coming from the Big 12 into the SEC, is that one spent a few years building up their offensive line, and one has got 5 new starters. And you see it very visibly in the game they played last week. So Herbie said that this week, like Texas has gotten better every year that Sark has been there, and they've had a better record every year that he's been there, and also the trenches have gotten better every year he's been here, and that's correlated. So I think there's a respect there. I also haven't seen Texas play I don't know that we feel the same way about Michigan's defensive line as we thought we were going to this year, and there's some of that. So I think Georgia's D tackles have been as good as they've been since probably 2021 in terms of like having multiple guys that are really doing everything that you want them to do and being disruptive. They had Jalen Carter in 2022, and that kind of papered over any other mistakes that other guys made just because he was so disruptive on his own. But they got 3, 4, maybe 5 guys that you feel like you can put out there, and like they're not just going to control the A gaps. Like they're going to penetrate in the backfield. They're going to make running backs make cuts early and throw things off its path. So we'll see. That's the matchup, right? But like I think Texas has a good offensive line, and I'm not saying they don't, but I also think that Texas's offensive line is, kind of your normal SEC offensive line. Like, I don't think this is a juggernaut unit. If I'm wrong at the end of the year or at the end of this game, then I'll say it. But, like, I don't think that Georgia's going to be surprised by the personnel they're facing. I think that Texas will be good, but that's what Georgia will expect, and I think Georgia's kind of used to playing good offensive lines on a week-in, week-out basis. So.
Yeah. Carson Beck, just overall, it feels like to me, I was actually chatting with Jake Crane earlier, and he was telling me, it feels like Beck's like obviously they lost some skill talent, some to the NFL, some guys no longer on the team, whatever. It seems like Beck is doing his best to try and elevate his teammates around him. But he looks more comfortable when they just play fast and he's not thinking. Like, just thoughts on Beck overall, and then in this matchup against what has been a good Texas defense. Again, it's hard to judge with the offenses they've played in Mississippi State and in Oklahoma and Michigan. But thoughts on how he'll potentially play this weekend.
I think for Carson, like, he had the terrible sort of first half at Alabama, and then he found himself, right? And as an athlete, when everything is going wrong and you still kind of like find that gear and realize like, oh, I didn't forget how to do that, and you're able to do it in the same game that everything goes wrong in, like, there's a level of confidence that comes out of that really can't be replicated through anything else. Has he played perfect, clean ball since then? No. I mean, I thought he played a really clean game against Auburn, and Georgia really kind of played a game against Auburn that was like, I mean, they had 8 possessions in that football game, and it was like, we're going to stay ahead of schedule on first and second down. We're going to be in third and short. We're going to kind of pound ETN, and like, we're just going to get out of here. And we feel like our defense, even in a shortened game, is just going to make more stops, and that's what happened. I thought last week's game, he was the 6th SEC quarterback in the last 20 years to have 450 plus yards passing and 75% completion in the same game. And the other 5 were Dak Prescott, Manziel, Burrow, Bryce Young, and Matt Corral in 2020, which kind of is not, doesn't make the stat as good as Matt Corral, but it was a good college quarterback. But like, I say that to say this: he's playing at a really high level right now, and he's making throws that he wasn't making even a few weeks ago. Like, dude, he made 2 throws on the run in that game on Saturday that like I've never seen him make, in terms of he is rolling, he never resets his feet, and he lets it go, and he just drops it in the bucket in the back of the end zone to Dylan Bell for a touchdown. Like, I didn't know he could do that. Yeah. So I think he's playing like above the rim right now, and he's playing well. There's the thing that nobody will really realize because of his numbers is that I think Georgia's receivers have been subpar at times. They've made mistakes. Like, there are guys that are playing a lot of snaps for Georgia right now that are not doing what they're supposed to do at times, and they're running the wrong routes or they're making the wrong reads. And so you see interceptions show up on his stat line that are not on him. And I think that makes what he's doing actually like all the more impressive, because it's not like he's out there with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson or something. Like, Georgia's receivers can do some nice things. I'm not saying they're a bad group, but they aren't playing perfect football. And I mean, he threw for 75% completion with 4 drops on Saturday. Like, there's elements of that that are really impressive. There's elements of that where it's like, those are the kind of mistakes that will get you beat, regardless of if your quarterback's playing well or not, because it turns a good throw into a turnover. So that is an unknown for me on some level going into this game, is like, how clean will some of that stuff be? But I do think for Beck, you can't ask much more out of him, like, in terms of how he's played the last couple of weeks. And I expect him to play well in this game, just because he's kind of already gone through the mental state of, am I okay? Can I do this? And then answering that with yes.
Yeah. What would you say going into this? Is, I think I asked you this against Bama too, but is there a matchup that concerns you? Is it playing on the road? Is it being a dog? Like, what is the biggest concern in this game?
I think the concern for Georgia is I like this spot for them defensively, just because what Texas does offensively is much more similar to what Georgia does than a lot of teams that Georgia plays throughout the year. And so I think like there's a familiarity there that will help them, and there's not the dual threat kind of stress that like a Milroe or even a Peyton Thorne would put on you, right? I worry for Georgia in that Steve Sarkisian is really good at like watching your tape and saying, I'm going to draw up these 5 plays this week that I think are going to be touchdown plays because I can pull this guy or that guy. And Georgia's put some really bad eye discipline on tape. I mean, like last week, their eye discipline was terrible, especially at the linebacker position at times. And Texas has this tight end in Gunnar Helm, who I think is a stud. He's bigger than anybody on the field. He's got enough speed to be dangerous. And Georgia's linebackers are really good athletes, but Sark uses him in motion and in different ways that are, not just your average like inline tight ends that's coming out of his stance and running a seam. So I think Georgia's linebackers are going to have to do a good job of not biting too hard on run and like letting him out the back door for big plays that lead to points. And that will be one I watch. And I think in general, it's kind of, if you tell me Georgia's back seven has a good day against Texas's pass catchers, then I would tell you Georgia probably wins. I'm just not sure that they will.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier, but it's not an elimination game for Georgia for the SEC, but it's kind of close. Like you'd need Bama to drop a couple, you'd need LSU to drop a couple, you'd Texas to drop a couple afterward. Well, I guess three because it'd be Georgia's second. So it's pretty close. And so that said, you probably still get. I mean, no, not probably. You get in right with two top five losses and at 10-2, but it certainly becomes like razor thin margin. You can't drop to Ole Miss, which they've got their issues. You can't drop to Tennessee, which they've got their issues too. But I mean, if there's anything this college football season has shown, it's shoot, anybody can win.
There's not really an elite team out there, and I think Texas might be the best candidate at the moment to be an elite team. I also would say, like, if Georgia had played Texas's schedule right now, like, we'd be talking about, the Kirby Smart dynasty is alive and well in the post-Saban era and all that kind of crap. So, yeah, I don't know what they are. I think they're a very good football team. I also think Georgia's a very good football team. A lot of those teams you just named, right? Like, I just don't know that there's a great team this year, which actually kind of makes it a good season for this 12-team playoff. There's been a lot of seasons where I feel like, we can just fast forward to the end and, put these two teams together and we'll kind of know the result.
Yeah, for a lot of years, you didn't even really need the 4 team. Actually, most years, you didn't really need the 4 team. I went back for very obvious reasons and looked at what the 1-4 blowouts were for the playoff, and they're like almost every year there was a blowout in the playoffs. Now, last year's playoff was great, and we got some really good games out of it. But it is the kind of year where a 6 could win. Like Georgia loses this and goes 10-2, and they're the 6th seed. And they go win it all, right? Like that wouldn't shock anybody, right? Ohio State drops another one to Oregon in the Big 12 championship, and they go in with 2 losses, and they're the 5 seed or they're the 7 seed or whatever, and they go win it. I don't think that would shock anybody at this point.
No, I mean, one thing I'll say about Georgia real quick is just like talking about some of these issues with Mississippi State that you asked me about earlier. It's like, well, some of the eye discipline stuff with the linebackers, it's like, well, that's where Smile Mondin should be, but he's out with a foot sprain, and like Mississippi State hits a run because of some bad gap responsibility on the edge. It's like, well, that's where Michael Williams should be, but he's not. And so there's that element to this. So I don't know that Georgia's going to be much healthier for this game than they were for the Alabama game. Actually, they'll probably be less healthy than they were for that game. But like, that is sort of the problem on some level is we might judge Georgia after this game and say, oh, they're just not it this year. And then they get a few guys back that are future first rounders and they look like a different team. So I don't know there's that.
It's a little early in the week, and so I don't know if you have an official prediction yet or not, but do you have a lean on this, how you think it ends up going down?
I honestly, I think if Georgia was facing another kind of dual threat guy or a offense that is really, really like vertically inclined and throws a lot of passes downfield, that I would probably be picking against Georgia in this game. That's not really what Texas does with Ewers in there. I hate to say this because it's going to sound like controversial or whatever, and I'm not trying to like fine bomb this thing, but if Arch Manning was playing in this game, I would feel worse about Georgia's chances than I do with Ewers in there, just because his style is more like dink and dunk. And I think all but like 4 or 5 of Texas's receiving yards in the first half of that Oklahoma game came after the catch.
Yeah.
I don't see teams go and come out of games with an average depth of target of like 4 yards and beat Georgia. That's not really like what they do. And I mean, if anything, Georgia's defense, and Kirby Smart will tell you this, Georgia's defense is designed to really challenge you on the short to intermediate stuff and then force you to throw the deep balls. And they feel like, okay, we get into these deep ball scenarios, and maybe you hit one, maybe you hit two, but also Malachi Starks comes and picks one of them, and like we'll play that kind of deep ball roulette game, and we don't think 00 Black is going to hit 2 times a half, right? So I think for Georgia, I love the spot they're in. I do have concerns about the injuries, but I think Georgia's offense is playing better than Texas's offense right now. And what people kind of came out of that Mississippi State game like, why did they run the ball more? I'm concerned about that. It's like, well, go back a week earlier, and that's kind of how they beat Auburn. Was they had that ground and pound game, and they went on these long drives. So I think they've kind of shown that they're well-rounded. And I think, if anything, last week's game plan was probably designed to put some stuff on tape for Texas that keeps Texas from feeling like, oh, we can just load the box on Trevor Etienne. So I think this game sets up well for Georgia. I think for Texas, the pressure of kind of not the pressure, but like the spotlight is big, and I just don't know that they've really played the game yet like this one will be, and Georgia has. So I'm going to lean Georgia on this very slightly, just because I think in a way they need it more. And my general experience with college football games is a lot of times the team that kind of needs it more, if you get to like teams with equal talent, is the one that wins it. And I think, Georgia will probably be able to get out of there with a win, but nothing would surprise me in this game. Like I would be surprised if we saw Georgia get down 28-0 again, just because that's not really the style that Texas plays on offense. But I'll say, I like Georgia by a possession, but I think that they could, the thing for Georgia in this game that will be interesting to watch is like if they can kind of game script the thing in the first half to get up 10 to 14 points. Historically speaking, Sark is a guy who will kind of abandon the run when he gets his team down by 14. And I think that would be a good thing for Georgia, because I think if you look out on Saturday night and Quinn Ewers throws the ball 45 times in this game, then you probably won,
Yeah. When you said that, it reminded me, I've been thinking of the big games that we've had this year. Obviously, Georgia-Bama being the first one. I think, you think about which team that game probably meant more to, like with the whole DeBoer era, it probably meant more to Georgia. Ohio State, Oregon last week. Who did that game mean more to? Obviously,
Right.
Made a very big deal to Ryan Day and the noise around him. But Oregon trying to prove they belong, it probably meant a little more to them being the underdog. And so if that trend continues,
all that,
yeah, the trend continues, then this one probably means a little more to Georgia just due to the loss that they have, being the dog and stuff like that. So, Graham, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work and get more of your content?
Check us out, dawgcentral.com. That's, my website. Obviously not solely mine, but I do a lot of work there with a bunch of other guys and co-own it. And we're, a fully fledged operation, intel analysis, all that good stuff, news, cover press conferences, all that good stuff. But check us out there. I'm on Twitter at Graham Coffee DC. And if you are a Georgia fan and you're watching this and you're going to be in Austin this weekend, Dawgs Central will be having a happy hour at Crown and Anchor Pub from 4 to 6. If you get there at 4, if you get there before the tab runs out, I'll buy your first beer and some nachos. So come hang out with us, and it should be a good time. Places right by Texas's campus.
Yeah, no, I'm jealous I was in Tuscaloosa, but I'm a little jealous not to be in Austin this weekend. Seems like a fun one to be at for sure.
Never too late, man.
Yeah, I was telling somebody else this. My wife's taking my daughter down to Miami for the Taylor concert, and so I'm on dad duty with the boys, and I'm not bringing a 2 and 4 year old out to.
Nah, don't do that. Yeah, don't do
sounds less fun than maybe it would have been, but hopefully this one lives up to the hype. I mean, certainly don't. I didn't think Ohio State, Oregon could outdo Bama, Georgia, which I'm not saying it did, but I didn't think we'd get another one like that. Then, maybe I don't think we'll get another one, but hopefully we will. Hopefully we'll get
We've had
another
a lot of great
classic.
games this year. Even Ole Miss, LSU, and we've had so
Yeah.
many awesome
Tennessee, Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe for Georgia's sake, they can kind of not have a routine. This will not feel routine on any level. ESPN is moving to Austin for the weekend with this F1 race in town too. But I do think Georgia has played in some games like this over the years, and that will probably help them because the hoopla around this already feels big, and it's Tuesday.
Yeah, no, it's going to be massive. Going to be a lot of fun. Have fun out there in Austin, man. I appreciate you for hanging out.
Absolutely. Always good being with you, TJ.
Thanks, buddy.